Podcast. Appreciate you checking us out on the CHCH multimedia platform. I'm Bubba O'Neil. As you know, this podcast is all about the outstanding athletes, coaches, executives, and teams that hail from this region. Today, it's all about the Canadian Football League and the team that are seeking to be the Beast of the East. With their comeback victory over the hurting Toronto Argonauts, the Montreal Alouettes lead the East Division, but it's those Hamilton Tiger Cats who do have a game in hand. Last week in Hamilton Stadium, the Tiger Cats won their third consecutive game, beating the Ottawa Redblacks in what was a real close shave.
Some motion in the Ticats backfield. Bo Levi Mitchell has the football. Looking, firing, caught, touchdown! Touchdown Cats, Kenny Lawler. It's a 3-yard TD, and the Tiger Cats, for the first time tonight, have the lead.
Of Rick Zamper and Bo Levi to Kenny the King for the late winner, and although it wasn't pretty, Hamilton did edge Ottawa 23-20 on Sunday. It's a rematch in the capital, and to break it down, let's bring in the voice of the Red Blacks from TSN 1200, AJ Jakubec. How are you, partner?
Bob, I'm great to be with you.
As always. Hey, let's take a look before we look forward to the contest that's coming up the back end of the home and home. Let's look back to last week. Turnover battle, plain and simple. Hamilton win 4-1, and I thought that was the difference.
Yeah, it was. A couple of plays as well. Ottawa's had trouble with penalties all season long, and not one in the first half, but a couple of key penalties down the stretch. I think if that's not a block in the back on James Peter, I think Ottawa wins that football game. It's 24-10 at that point, 13 minutes to go. I get it's the CFL, but it does feel like that was the game-defining play, and certainly roughing the passer call a little bit later helped extend that game-winning drive. Would have been a 3rd and 10. So untimely plays, untimely turnovers, untimely penalties, story of the season for the Ottawa Redblacks, and it does feel like must win for Ottawa this weekend.
Well, I'll tell you, Drew Brown, I thought in his return looked pretty respectable, but again, Peters really got him a couple of times.
Yeah, he's been okay since returning. They're 0-3 since, or 0-2 since he returned, 0-3 with him as the starter this year, and quite frankly, it needs to be better. I think, Ottawa's probably been hit harder by injuries than any other team in the Canadian Football League this year, especially when it comes to probably the two key components for a football team, and that's quarterback and Canadians. At one point, they're down 13 Canadians, starting to get a little bit better in that regard. Aiden John and Justin Howell both expected to be on the roster this week. We saw Zach Pelios return at right tackle last week, so it is heading in the right direction. But those are guys that are tough to replace. But at quarterback, look, everyone's going to miss games. Like it's very rare in this league now that you're going to get 18 starts out of your starting quarterback. So the key for me is when you've got your starting quarterback, you've got to make some hay. And 0-3 isn't going to cut it in that regard. And while I think Drew Brown has been okay, he needs to be better. Everyone needs to be a little bit better if this team is going to turn some of these close losses, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, into victories. Because 1-6, if you go 1-6, you're 0-4 against the East, you're 0-3 at home. Everyone else is going to be 500 or better. In terms of above the playoff cut line, right now you've got 4 of those teams in the West. Is the season over at 1-6? No, because we've seen plenty of teams. Hamilton started poorly in 2022. Ottawa started poorly in 2017. Everyone always talks about the 2011 BC Lions that were 0-5 to start the season, and they won the Grey Cup. And Winnipeg started 0-4 and 2-6 last year and made the Grey Cup. But that's just a really long mountain to climb if you don't win this football game this weekend. So to me, you've got to straighten things out. Drew Brown hasn't played a home game this year, only lost one at home last year when he was the starting quarterback for the Red Blacks. And that was when he was banged up with an ankle injury. So if this team's going to make a comeback and make it interesting in the East and for a potential crossover, I think it has to start this week going into the bye week.
Going into that game, I kind of was thinking of matchups, and even though they don't match up against each other, it was like Kenny Lawler versus Eugene Lewis. I think the two best receivers in the league. I look at Lawler, he finished with 6 receptions on 10 targets, 95 yards. He got into the end zone twice, and really in one in spectacular fashion. Eugene Lewis, 7 receptions, 14 targets, 128 yards, but I think you got to get him into the end zone.
Well, I think you're right. And look, there's other players that would have a case for that, whether it's Justin McInnis, whether it's Justin Hardy. I mean, Tim White's a pretty good receiver when he's at his best as well. But it does feel like, to me, it's probably Kenny Lawler and Geno Lewis. And I think the difference last game is, that amazing catch from Lawler, and you're looking for one of those from Geno Lewis. I think he's been solid. He's second in the league in receiving yards, but again, you're just looking for a little bit more from everyone, especially offensively, especially now that the O-line is in a much better spot and your quarterback is here. They need to make some hay, and right now this team is dead last in the Canadian Football League in points, and it's not all just because of the 3 games that Drew Brown didn't play. They've just been okay. They need to, and it's too many seconds and second and longs, too many passing plays for me. I mean, you're winning the majority of that game against Hamilton, and you run the ball 10 times versus 38 passes. That balance needs to get a little bit better. At times they're too predictable. At times they don't stretch the field enough. So there's a lot to work on. There's a lot to build with here. I truly believe it. They've got a pretty talented team, but they need to get things rolling in a hurry, and especially at home where they won 7 of their 9 games last year and 0-2 to start this season.
It's funny that you say that, AJ, because when the season began and everyone's doing their prognostications, to me, the most dangerous team, I kept saying, and you can ask anyone I've talked to, and I go on national radio stations saying the Ottawa Redblacks to me were one of the biggest threats to me, in my opinion, for the East Division, putting Montreal at first. What's the mood right now for the Red Black fans right now? And I do listen to your post-game shows and, of course, your work as well, too, on TSN 1200. And, it's funny because he had a stint in Hamilton, and I'm hearing the likes of the offensive coordinator, don't like the dink and dunk offense. And once again, for the second time, at least in a calendar year, it sounds to me that the fans aren't happy with Bob Dice.
Yeah, I mean, look, the offensive coordinator, the head coach, when things don't go well, they're always going to be right at the top of the list, and that's certainly been the case here. I will say this in terms of your expectations, and I know Dave Naylor picked the Red Blacks to make the Grey Cup. Like, I was a little bit more cautious. I really liked what they did in the offseason, but I looked at Montreal and I looked at what they were returning and the culture that they built and what they've done the last couple of years. And to me, the East was always going through Montreal and Toronto for that matter. And obviously they haven't started very well and they lost probably more key guys than Montreal did. But most important for Toronto is they don't have their quarterback. If Chad Kelly is playing quarterback for Toronto, maybe they're 3-3. Maybe they're 4-2. We'll wait and see. Maybe that's a game they win yesterday. So, and it comes back to what I'm saying. Again, you're very fortunate if you have your quarterback play 18 games. In this league, you need 2 really good ones. And Ottawa was able to survive 1 and 2 without their starting quarterback. And now they need some wins when this group is together. So it's incumbent on everyone just to win games. It's as simple as that. Whether it's fair or not, there's going to be criticism on those key positions, especially the head coach, when you don't win games. And there's only one way to stop that, and that's to win games. It's as simple as that. I mean, you have no time for moral victories in this sport, and especially when you've got high expectations and expectations, at the very least, to make the playoffs. Like they've explicitly said, a successful year for us is winning playoff games and hosting playoff games. So if that means you finish 3rd in the East and you win a playoff game, then I guess that's success. If that means you finish 2nd in the East and you host a playoff game and you happen to lose it, in a 1-score game, then it's disappointing, but still has to be regarded as successful in terms of how expectations were outlined. And for me, that has to be the bare minimum for this group with this roster. And, you hate to see it end in July. Like, we got a lot of football left. If your season ends in September and October, it's not ideal. You'd rather it end in November, but if it ends in July, that would be a real shame. And it makes for a long football season for everybody involved if that's the case.
I've heard complaints of, time usage issues, strategy, in-game strategy, lack of halftime adjustments. Does that fall on Bob Dice? And do you even are those things even, are you seeing them during the games?
Well, I think the previous week, like I didn't see any coaching issues against Hamilton. I mean, there's just mistakes on the field, and I think they played a pretty good football game for 3 quarters, and then didn't do enough in the fourth, and too many untimely penalties, untimely turnovers, not enough big plays. So can you blame that on adjustments? I don't know. To me, I blame it on execution more than anything. The previous week, I don't think there's any question. At Edmonton, they had the Elks doubting themselves. I mean, that's their only win this year. They jumped out to a 22-3 lead, and it's like, okay, this is not good. Ottawa scores a couple of touchdowns. Then they're driving before halftime, and it was kind of a calamity of errors between, they run the ball once, which didn't make a lot of sense in that time. Bob admitted that he should have called a timeout. I think there wasn't enough urgency out there. So to me, in the end, it always rests on the head coach, but it's coach, it's coordinator, it's quarterback. That all needs to be better. But, watching this last game, I don't think you can blame the head coach. That's my opinion. To me, it's incumbent on the players, and especially the top players, just to be better. Simple as that.
You look at what I would do the next 5 games coming up on the schedule, and you did talk about the fact that at 1-6, and yeah, we have seen some miraculous comebacks in the Canadian Football League, and I can only attest to even what the Tiger Cats did last year, winning 4 or 5 to even make it close down to the final week of making the playoffs, which they did not do. I look at that Red Blacks schedule, and it's rather daunting, I think. I mean, the Tiger Cats as well, too, especially when you got to face Nathan Rourke twice, who seems to be heating up. And, of course, this going at Saskatchewan has always been a problem for the Tiger Cats. But this East Division, to me, is going to be – it could be a scrap right down to the final week.
Yeah, I don't look at that and see daunting. You got Toronto and Edmonton there, and that's – 2 of the worst 3 teams in the league, and you're 0-2 against them. So you need to win those games. You need to beat Calgary coming out of the bye week. And Winnipeg's a team that I don't think they're what they were 5 years ago. I don't know if Zach Collaros is what he was 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago. So I don't see daunting. I see opportunity.
Really?
I see Hamilton's got a good team. I see opportunity this week. I don't think there's much difference, quite frankly, between the top team. Like, Edmonton hasn't been very good. But especially when Chad Kelly is back, and you looked at how they played yesterday against a very good Montreal team on the road. Honestly, I don't see, like, you can throw me any 5 games on the schedule, and I'm not going to say that's the murderer's row, but I'm also not going to say, oh, geez, there's a couple of free spots in the bingo card. Like, you just got to bring it every week. Right. And in the end, you're going to probably play a few close games if you bring it every week. You'd like to win a couple by a couple of scores, but it comes down to some of those close games. And last year, Ottawa won those close games, and this year they're 1-3 in those close games, and 0-3 under Drew Brown in those close games. And he talked about that, after the Edmonton game, as they did that 7 times last year. The late comebacks, the late drives, just some of the stuff that you need to do in the last 3 minutes of a football game, which can be an eternity in the Canadian Football League. And so I don't know. I just feel like 1-9, this is as much parity as I've seen in the Canadian Football League, and it's just about execution. So I don't see a murderer's row there.
your thoughts on Hamilton just a little bit here, because it's funny around Steeltown here, and obviously there is a fan base. It's been 25 years since a Grey Cup has been won by the Hamilton Tiger Cats. They're 3-2. They lost to two teams that, have a combined record, I think, of 9-2 in Calgary and Saskatchewan. And yet there's this kind of wait-and-see attitude right now. And in fact, people were very critical of the Tiger Cats and the way they won the game. And I thought to myself, boy, you know what? In previous years, the Ticats lose that kind of game. But this time, they found a way to win. Your thoughts on the Tiger Cats as a squad?
Well, I said it with 5.5 minutes left in that football game. And Ottawa was leading at that point. Bad teams find a way to lose those games, and good teams find a way to win those games. So, give the Ticats credit. It's not a game. It's a game. People. I always talk to people after the week, whether it's people in market, people out of the market. Just get a taste, especially when things aren't going well. You can get into a bit of an echo chamber. I never really like doing that. As one person told me, it's a game Ottawa should win 100 times out of 100 in the fourth quarter, and they blew it. But Hamilton took advantage, and they got the job done. And, give them credit for that, because, I don't think I've ever seen a team in CFL history basically, and, there would be a couple of exceptions. There's been some dominant ones. You think back to Baltimore in 1995, Edmonton back in 89, and they were 16-2, blew out everybody, and then found a way to lose in the East or in the West Final against Saskatchewan. So, but for the most part, even the real good teams go through games where they just don't look great, but find a way to win because they don't beat themselves. And that's what Hamilton did this last game. So I think it's a credit to them. I think, when I look at Hamilton, do I put them in lockstep? I know the records could be the same at the end of the weekend. I'm not going to put lock status on Hamilton for a playoff spot, but they've got a very impressive offensive unit. We'll see on the defense. And, look, when you've got Bo Levi Mitchell looking like he's in his prime, and he was off last week, and they still won, I think that's a real good sign. But, again, they win this week. You're not making plans for November yet, but I think you can start to look ahead and say, wow, you got a 3-game lead on the Argos, 3.5 on Ottawa, and part of the reason this game is so big beyond the obvious in the records is you just look at the season series, and essentially it's a 4-game lead on Ottawa at this point in the season. So if you're able to essentially knock Ottawa into the rearview mirror, this would be a massive win for Hamilton. But yeah, to answer your question, work in progress, 3-2. I think they're off to a pretty good start, especially based on how they've started in recent years. This is the last time they've been over 500 in 4 years.
Yeah.
So to me, there should be some optimism.
I thought so, but it's interesting when you listen and obviously read some of the fan boards and all that kind of stuff. Hey, one final one.
I don't read that stuff.
I know. You've been saying that to me for years, and I should listen. I really should listen. What about the league this year? Your thoughts on the league as itself? Do you think it's off to a good start? Has Calgary been the big surprise to you? Just kind of an overlook on the league for what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, I think there's been some really good games. I think, as always, the first couple of weeks of the season, there's some duds because preseason, it was only 2 games, and I don't want it to be any longer, trust me. But, with a short camp, short preseason, I think you're going to get a little bit of ugliness at times early in the season. And I think we've seen some really good games. I thought last night was a really good football game between Toronto and Montreal. So, yeah, I think the league, for the most part, off to a pretty good start. And beyond that, yeah, Calgary's definitely the surprise for me. And I'm not even, and look, they've looked impressive, especially their defense, but I'm not putting them in the playoffs yet either. I still need to see more. I mean, Ottawa went there, and I get it's crappy weather, but it's crappy weather for both teams. Ottawa ran almost 250 yards on them, and they got one win. So, like, I truly believe, like, I think Ottawa's going to win the next 2 weeks. And if they don't, they're in big trouble. But I think they're going to win this week. I think they're going to have to be better, because I think Hamilton's going to be better this week. Mm-hmm. I truly believe that. I think Bo Levi Mitchell's going to be better this week. But I think the offense will click at a higher rate. And then I think Ottawa beats Calgary out of the bye week. And if they don't, I'm not saying it's season over. It might be at 1-7, maybe not at 2-6, but it does feel like I can start making plans for mid-November after the CPL final, because Atletico Ottawa plans on kicking Forge's rear ends in that one.
Well, Forge haven't lost a game yet, right? We could break a record here tonight against in their match today. So, like, that's been a fun one too. In fact, we talk about coming back, and you talk about the CFL teams and good teams finding ways to win. And I can't believe Atletico came back and won on the spot kick right near the end. That was a thriller.
Did you watch the second half, Bubs?
Yeah, I did.
I mean, Forge barely got out of their half.
It was a defensive shell.
This is the best Atletico Ottawa team. And look, I called Forge games on Hamilton radio and in PEI. So I have the greatest respect for Bobby Smirniotis and what they've done. And they're the team to beat. I joke with that a little bit. They are the team to beat, especially come playoff time. They've set the bar in the league, along with Calgary, but especially Forge. And it's tough to bet against Bobby Smirniotis. He's a hell of a coach. But Atletico Ottawa's got the best team in the league. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win, but like, they've got 5 or 6 of the best players in the league. David Rodriguez is the best player in the league. He might be the best player I've ever seen in this league. So yeah, it's, with him and Sam Salter and Kevin DeSantos and Manny Aparicio, you got Nate Ingham at the back, and you've got some veteran experience. The one hole that can be exploited is their defense, because they're young. At times they go 3 center backs that are U21 Canadians, and at times they've been exploited. The game against York in the Canadian Championship, you're up 4-2 on aggregate, and you're up a man, and York scores a couple of goals, and it was defending that was to blame on that comeback, but they ended up getting a couple of late goals. They can score goals for fun, but as in all sports, you need to defend to win championships. And this team has shown they can. They had 4 clean sheets in the last month. So the fact that they've been able to do that and show that they can win in multiple ways is encouraging. But in the end, you still need to get it done at crunch time, and looking forward to some really great meetings second half of the season. And who knows, maybe we'll see these teams meet for the Canadian Championship as well.
Well, I certainly hope so, because I think those are the 1 and 2, and I know Cavalry would probably have something to say about that as well too. But
they will.
They will, and I think they'll be even a little bit better. But through the first half of the season, it really has been Ottawa and Hamilton or Forge, if you want to say, as 1-2 in my opinion. But let's hope for that. Let's also hope for a real good game, hoping for a big turnout at TD Stadium, and I think this was going to be a good one. And hey, as you said, I think it's desperation time for the Red Blacks, and the Tiger Cats better be ready for a big, big punch. They cannot, under any circumstances, start reading the press clippings and thinking that they're a first-place team. This season is got so much more to go. So let's hope for a good one, AJ.
Yeah, hoping for a good one, and Hamilton doesn't need this one. Ottawa does. So you guys will be okay going 3-3 and move on from there. How about that?
I'll let the boys know. Thanks for joining us, partner.
Cheers, Bubs.
We'll talk soon. That's your Sportsline Podcast for the day. And as just heard, we love talking sports. We love talking about the CFL. Hey, the CPL got in there as well, too. If you do know of an athlete, team, or event to promote, the Sportsline Podcast do want to hear from you. Please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. We need you to subscribe. It's for free, folks. And if you have something to say, we always appreciate your comments. For the wonderful people that make the Sportsline Podcast possible, thank you so very much. And we'll see you tomorrow.